Jason Voorhees stands as one of horror cinema's most iconic and enduring figures, a silent killer whose hockey mask became synonymous with slasher films and summer camp terror. Emerging from the Friday the 13th franchise that began in 1980, Jason transformed from tragic victim to unstoppable force of nature, embodying primal fears about wilderness, water, and the consequences of neglect. Unlike chatty villains who explain their motives, Jason communicates through brutal action, making him a pure expression of relentless vengeance. The original Friday the 13th subverted audience expectations brilliantly by making Jason's mother, Pamela Voorhees, the actual killer. Mrs. Voorhees sought revenge against camp counselors. She blamed for her son's drowning death years earlier at Camp Crystal Lake. The twist revealed Jason as motivation rather than perpetrator, a drowned child whose death drove his mother to madness and murder. This backstory provided emotional foundation that elevated the film beyond simple body count entertainment into tragedy about parental grief, twisted into homicidal rage. Jason's supposed drowning in 1957 became the franchise's original sin, the event that cursed Crystal Lake and everyone who tried to reopen the camp. The story depicted negligent counselors too busy with romance to notice a struggling child in the water. This scenario tapped into genuine anxieties about institutional failures and authority figures prioritizing personal pleasure over duty. Jason's death represented every parent's nightmare, trusting someone to protect your child only to have that trust catastrophically betrayed. The character's physical appearance evolved significantly across the franchise. Early films showed Jason with a burlap sack over his head, emphasizing his deformity and isolation. The iconic hockey mask didn't appear until Part 3, but immediately became definitive, a blank canvas that was somehow more unsettling than any monstrous face. The mask's simplicity allowed audiences to project their own fears onto Jason, while the hockey equipment suggested perverted childhood innocence. Sports gear transformed into instrument of terror. Jason's silence proved crucial to his effectiveness as horror icon. While Freddy Krueger quipped and Pinhead philosophized, Jason never spoke, making him fundamentally inhuman and unknowable. This lack of personality made him more force of nature than individual. He didn't negotiate, explain, or gloat. He simply appeared and killed with mechanical efficiency. The silence also meant victims couldn't reason with him or find psychological leverage, creating hopelessness that dialogue might have diminished. The franchise's relationship with Jason's mortality remained wonderfully inconsistent. He drowned as a child but returned in Part 2 as an adult living in the woods. Various films killed him definitively, only to resurrect him through increasingly absurd means: lightning strikes, demonic possession, nanotechnology. This immortality became a feature rather than bug, with the series embracing supernatural elements that made Jason literally unstoppable. Audiences accepted these resurrections because Jason's persistence reflected the indestructibility of trauma and guilt. Crystal Lake itself functioned as a character, a cursed location that drew victims regardless of warnings or previous tragedies. The lake's beauty, pristine water, surrounding forests, contrasted sharply with the violence occurring there, creating unsettling juxtaposition between natural serenity and human brutality. Every attempt to reopen the camp or develop the area ended in bloodshed, suggesting some places carry stains that can't be erased, where past violence perpetually bleeds into present. The franchise's treatment of sex and morality followed classic slasher formula, where promiscuity often preceded death. However, this wasn't simple moralizing, but reflection of vulnerability. Characters distracted by romance or intoxication made easier targets than those remaining alert. The pattern also connected to Jason's origin story, killed because counselors were too busy with each other to supervise. Each sexual encounter at Crystal Lake unconsciously reenacted the negligence that created the monster. Jason's kill creativity became a franchise signature, with each film trying to top previous entries' inventiveness. Sleeping bags slammed against trees, heads punched clean off, bodies folded backwards, The deaths were simultaneously horrifying and darkly comic. This creativity served practical purposes beyond entertainment, giving each film memorable moments that justified its existence even when plots grew repetitive. The kills became the content, with narrative existing mainly to deliver victims to Jason's blade. The character's physical presence owed much to various actors who portrayed him, particularly Kane Hodder, who played Jason in 4 consecutive films. Hodder brought physicality and body language that made Jason feel dangerous despite the mask-hiding facial expressions. His aggressive movements and imposing stature created menace through pure presence. Later actors continued this tradition, understanding Jason worked through physical intimidation rather than dialogue or facial acting. Friday the 13th's influence on horror cinema proved immense despite critical dismissal. The franchise popularized the summer camp setting, made hockey masks terrifying, and demonstrated slasher films' commercial viability. Every subsequent Cabin in the Woods horror owed debts to what Friday the 13th established about isolated locations, teenage victims, and seemingly unkillable killers. The formula became so pervasive it defined an entire subgenre's conventions and audience expectations. The franchise's self-awareness evolved over time, with later entries embracing camp and humor absent from the original straightforward horror. Jason Lives explicitly played with audience expectations, acknowledging the character's immortality through James Bond-style opening and meta-commentary. Jason X took the character to space in 2455, fully embracing absurdity while still delivering satisfying kills. This evolution allowed the franchise to continue when straight horror became unsustainable after so many repetitive sequels. Freddy vs. Jason in 2003 represented a landmark crossover that horror fans had desired for years. Pitting 2 iconic killers against each other required careful balance. Both needed to seem threatening while eventually one had to triumph. The film succeeded by understanding what made each character distinctive and allowing them to showcase their particular styles. Jason's physicality contrasted with Freddy's mind games, creating varied horror that played to both characters' strengths. The 2009 remake attempted to reboot the franchise for contemporary audiences with faster pacing, more developed characters, and a Jason who ran rather than walked. While commercially successful, the film divided fans who valued the original's slower burn and Jason's inexorable stalking. The remake debate highlighted how crucial specific elements were to the character's appeal changed too much, and he became generic slasher rather than distinctive icon. Jason's cultural penetration extended far beyond the films themselves. The character appeared in comics, novels, video games, and countless parodies. The hockey mask became a Halloween staple, instantly recognizable even to people who'd never seen the films. This mainstream acceptance transformed Jason from niche horror figure to general pop culture icon, someone referenced in everything from cartoons to sitcoms to music videos. The franchise's relationship with camp counselors and authority figures reflected broader anxieties about institutional trust and adult responsibility. Every film featured authorities who dismissed warnings, covered up previous tragedies, or prioritized profit over safety. These failing adults created conditions for Jason's return, suggesting the killer was symptom of systemic negligence rather than random evil. The teenagers died for adult sins, bearing consequences of decisions they didn't make. Jason's deformities tied to themes of social rejection and outcast revenge. His appearance, depicted variously as disfigured, deformed, or monstrous, marked him as someone society would reject and mock. The bullying backstory in some entries suggested Jason's monstrosity was partially created by cruelty he experienced. This sympathetic element complicated the character, making him simultaneously victim and victimizer, someone whose pain doesn't justify his actions but explains their ferocity. The franchise's declining quality over numerous sequels demonstrated the challenge of sustaining slasher series. After establishing formula and iconic killer, subsequent films struggled to innovate without abandoning what made the original work. Each entry needed more creative kills, more outrageous resurrections, more extreme gore. This escalation eventually became parody of itself, with diminishing returns on shock value as audiences became desensitized to escalating violence. The legal battles over Friday the 13th rights prevented new films for years, leaving the franchise in limbo while other horror series continued producing content. These disputes highlighted how valuable the intellectual property had become. Jason was worth fighting over because the character retained commercial appeal decades after his creation. The legal paralysis frustrated fans eager for new entries, while also perhaps preserving the character from further dilution through excessive sequels. Jason's lack of supernatural origin in early films made him scarier than later supernatural versions. The possibility that someone could simply refuse to die, driven by rage and pain to continue hunting victims, felt more disturbing than mystical resurrections. Human persistence and determination, even in death, proved more unsettling than magic because it suggested will alone could transcend mortality. Later supernatural elements added spectacle, but removed some of the original's gritty horror. The franchise's treatment of final girls varied in quality, with some films developing strong survivors, while others treated them as interchangeable victims. Ginny Field in Part 2 used psychological warfare, exploiting Jason's relationship with his mother to survive. Tommy Jarvis appeared across multiple films, becoming Jason's recurring nemesis. These developed characters created continuity and emotional investment beyond simple survival horror, though many sequels abandoned this character development for simpler formula. Jason's relationship with his mother remained the franchise's emotional core even after her death. His shrine to Pamela, his hallucinations of her commanding him to kill, his rage at anyone occupying her camp, these elements suggested Jason was less independent killer than extension of maternal will. This psychological dimension added depth to what could have been simple monster, making him a case study in arrested development and pathological attachment. The franchise's influence on independent horror and slasher conventions proved lasting. Friday the 13th demonstrated low-budget horror could achieve massive commercial success, inspiring countless imitators and launching careers. The template had established isolated location, teenage victims, creative kills. Final Girl became so standard that subverting these expectations became its own genre exercise. Modern horror either follows or consciously rejects Friday the 13th conventions, proving its foundational importance. Jason Voorhees endures because he represents something fundamental about guilt, consequence, and the permanence of trauma. Crystal Lake can never heal because the original sin, Jason's drowning, can never be undone or forgiven. Every new group of victims inherits this legacy, suffering for crimes they didn't commit, but which their presence unwittingly commemorates. Jason is memory made flesh, grief transformed into endless vengeance, a reminder that some wounds never close and some debts are paid in perpetual blood. The hockey mask stares blankly because there's nothing behind it but pure, undying purpose to make everyone feel the abandonment and pain that defined his existence. In this way, Jason isn't just a killer but a curse, the logical endpoint of negligence and casual cruelty, forever stalking anyone foolish enough to disturb the waters where he drowned.